What's up, everybody? Today, I'm thrilled to welcome back Chezi Spero to the Yours Truly podcast virtual studio. Chezi is a seasoned participant and the leader in the TLC community. He runs his own channel, The Young Levite, where he engages in discussions on biblical teachings and Talmudic studies. Additionally, he contributes to the Randos United within the TLC sphere. I invited Chezi back to discuss current events within our online community and to delve into interfaith dialogue. We'll be exploring his thoughts on the metamodern conversation, introduced by Brendan Graham Dempsey through the TLC podcast circuit, as well as Dr. Roy Clauser's recent contributions to religious philosophy. I'm also excited to get to know Chezi on a more personal level as we practice some conversation craft today. So, without further ado, I present to you Chezi Spero, the Young Levite. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. And we're back.
Hey, dude.
Back at it. Yeah, we were just discussing backstage kind of the difference between the Mishnah. Is that right? And
we're talking about the Mishnah, the oral Torah, and we spoke a little about how that eventually the Talmud is sort of discussions about the Mishnah. And then later on, the halakha, the Jewish law is broken down from the Talmud, and then the sages sort of at some point they codify it, and then it continues on.
And you were talking about why that you felt like that is a relevant kind of study and aspect of Jewish tradition related to this corner of the internet.
I would say it's from two aspects. One, that specifically in Ethics of Our Fathers, there's a lot of discussion with regards to proper dialogue, engagement with text, engagement with other people, proper engagement with your community, proper self-examination. So you're talking about thousands of years old with regards to these texts. Nevertheless, their teachings are very relevant to today. So not only do we gain from their teachings, and that could be true, hearing your neighbor give you a great idea, but there's a sense where this is tried and true, and there's a true wisdom over here that's still echoing today. And traditionally, we still believe, of course, that that's still echoing from Sinai. And if we go all the way back, it's from the first call from God to Adam, where are you? Right. So we are all still trying to respond back to that. And while learning these texts, we hope in some way we are still participating in a small sense in the continuous revelation of this Torah. I mean, some of that also would sort of relate to how one would take on metamodernity, or let's say biblical criticism specifically, but from like a zoomed out perspective with regards to the Talmud. And I've said this before in the past, even though Grimm told me it's horrible branding calling the TLC like a modern day Talmud, and I'll stay in my lane. But my point was that if the Talmud is a discussion of the Mishnah, or let's say Torah, it also is it's having that discussion through multiple generations, dealing with different historical contexts. So whether I'm dealing in Babylon or Jerusalem or with the Romans or with Alexander the Great, and at the same time, it's also engaging with worldly philosophies. And in a certain sense, that's what happens in the TLC, right? We're engaging with other people out there. We're trying to synthesize ideas. We're taking ideas and breaking them down, and it's a lively discussion. You've spoken about in the past of understanding and like what's underneath and what's undergirding these elements. So in Judaism, we have something called the Daf Hayomi, the daily page. And in the daily page, it's people participate, Orthodox Jews participate in across all the world. They each read the same page of Talmud, and once every 7 years they finish the whole Talmud. So much so that when they finish the cycle, there's been many of these. There's like crazy parties, like they rent out Shea Stadium, and there's keggers. They go, it's crazy. I mean, I don't know if there's keggers, but people are having a good time.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So on that, what is the timeline? When is the what year is 7 years? Like, when was the last one, I guess?
Last Sium. The last one. When was the last Sium Shas? Previous event. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, 2027 is going to be the next one. Last one was 2020.
Okay, cool.
It's also, I mean, again, it's very inspiring, not only because people are doing it, which I'll jump back into, but also because the Talmud tells us that one day the theaters and the coliseums will turn into teaching homes and learning places for the Jews at some point. So seeing like Shea Stadium be filled with like hundreds of thousands of Jews all finishing. So again, like is very biblical in a certain sense. And they were talking about it in the Talmud that at some point that will be able to happen. And that would be sort of like doing a cultural appropriation or like, using, in a certain sense, if you think about it, is LeBron James an idol, right? Are people burning effigies of him when he leaves Cleveland or not? But they're saying about that, like, all that energy around that and all they built that Coliseum, it's our job to sort of reorient that energy and that power, even if it's the pro-Palestinian protesters, right? That is such tremendous energy that we're not that's being galvanized, that we're not using it properly. We're not orienting it properly. And that's a loss. That's a problem in leadership. Like, I don't want to look at them. I mean, it's obviously very problematic personally in my estimation of what they're saying, but I want to look at it from a positive perspective and see that is still like, there's so much energy there. The fact that they're talking about, social justice, historically, if this was 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago, we would be championing them, right? Like we all want to be social justice warriors. The dust is settling. We'll see clarity one day soon, please God. But back to the daily daf. So when we all do that, there's a certain sense that we're all in an understanding, because I know you could be some. I have a client who's an ultra Orthodox rabbi, and anytime he sees me, which is it's not, I don't know, he sees me like once a month if we have some meetings. He doesn't ask me about the house. His first question is, he starts immediately engaging in the text, and he just expects me to just start talking to him about it. My partner is secular, so he always just like, walks off the second that conversation starts. But, he'll engage with that and he loves it, right? Because as far as he's concerned, like out of the blue, we could just start talking about it and I should know where he is.
Yeah, that's cool. There's pieces like even something in the culture. I can't remember the guy's name. He's kind of big on Twitter. He made the Dilbert comics.
Oh, I know who you're talking about right now.
Something. Okay, I should know his name, but he, for years he was doing the daily sip. Like he was encouraging everyone to take a sip with him on his coffee in the morning. Like if you were, and there's something to this idea of being like connected to people across space.
Scott Adams.
Yeah, Scott Adams. That's right. Being connected to people across space and kind of through time, like a little bit. I mean, but
it is through time though, because it's the same thing that they were learning 1,000 years ago.
Right. Yes. So I was just thinking more like the 24-hour day, but yeah, exactly. And even the idea, I think as a young evangelical, like the whole idea was like innovation and let's, do something different. And let's like, that was like this early 2000s culture that was going across Christianity. But, within parts of Christianity, there's also like the Book of Common Prayer that the Anglicans use, which is every and the Mass and all these things. They're all like, it's that same principle of being together like every day on the day of worship, like all over. And I do think there's a powerful reality and beauty to that kind of unifying thing. And then even when you're talking about your you say he's a Orthodox. He's your rabbi?
He's a client of mine. He happens to be a rabbi.
Okay, but being able to like jump in at 60 miles an hour to a conversation because you're already like, you're right there with them, you know, like that's also a beautiful unifying something to participate in that I think that's powerful. And that's kind of a little bit like trying to keep up with, well, like sports. I mean, you brought that in earlier, but like that there's this thing that people feel like they can jump into, and you know, when it goes to the level of the spiritual and the religious, that it's a deeper current. I don't know. That's just what I was like when that's what I was hearing. And I think it's really amazing. So speaking of, I wanted to, cause I don't know, I kind of looked you up either on Instagram or on your website or something. So do you talk about your day job on here ever?
Sure. I mean, not very much, but not like, cause I'm embarrassed or something. I just don't talk about it that often.
Yeah. Well, I wanted like, so you do design, right? Like interior design or what do you do?
I have an architecture design firm.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Build, I just generally dealing with like, like villas, or let's say what people call high end. I don't like using that term. But let's say high end homes. I would say like the largest scale would be, let's say, building buildings, like custom, like small, like boutique buildings, but generally like, homes, and like the architecture, the design, the management, all of it.
Yes. And I was going to tell you that because my sister has been in that business for a long time too. And she's in Nashville. So a lot of her clientele are also what you would call high end in that, cultural populace. And so, yeah, I just thought that was interesting. And so I didn't know when I first got into this space, like I just knew Chezi, I can't ever get it right. The Orthodox Jew hangs out in this space, but kind of like round out the person as well. Like who is this guy? And you've got family, and I think you have like, you were mentioning LeBron James, and did you spend some time in Ohio, or you have family?
I come from the Spero family. It's a very, very large family. So just through my grandfather, there's, let's say, over 100 of us now, and my grandfather had like cousins, siblings. So like, there's a lot of them. I don't even know all of them, but it's a very large family, and movers and shakers, so to speak, in the Jewish world at the time. Less so, I don't know if less so now, but like not as prominent. And my grandfather's a prominent rabbi there as well. But my family, all my siblings were born in the States, but my twin sister and I were born here in the early 80s when my parents moved over here. All my uncles and aunts and grandfather moved over here post 6-Day War, as my grandfather told the congregants of his community, "Can you not hear Mother Rachel calling?" And he told them that, like, I got a bus to move because it's time. And so modern Orthodox home.
What's a modern Orthodox? What is that?
Modern Orthodox is Jacob has like whole streams about like going down like the differences inside of here, but it would be trying to blend living an Orthodox life while embracing modernity to a certain extent. So engaging with the work in the educational sphere, in the work market, in the philosophical sphere. And hence also biblical criticism is something that, let's say, an ultra-Orthodox would reject in theory, potentially, and a modern Orthodox would try to embrace or try to contend with. But I would say the difference is modern Orthodox and Orthodox still consider themselves part of the same group, so to speak, with regards to 9 ultra-Orthodox people might not want me to marry their daughter. However, they would still consider me part of a quorum for prayer. Reform and conservative would not be able to join the party necessarily in that sense. And I, high school, I did 6 years in a religious seminary, theological school. A year and a half of that is working I was in the Army as a chaplain in the Air Force, and I went to law school, worked as a lawyer for a year, and then I transitioned into design.
What was the reason for that?
The law.
No, well, I mean, maybe, but the going from law to design.
Oh, the world of law is just in Hebrew it's called sheker, but it's just lies, nothing, emptiness.
Mm.
Um, just like the whole billing by like every 35 minutes, like you get like every 50, like it's just nonsense. And like very wealthy people talking about like their blue label and like it's $400 like a shot, and like I don't even drink alcohol, but I was like, what is happening over here? This is just like a nonsense conversation. I just couldn't, I really felt like repelled by it. And I also told them, like, when I left, I said, like, I can't, I'm like, you don't want me here. I'm like, I'm corrosive for this. I'm like, I don't believe in the things like you're doing over here. Like, this is just, I mean, I got along. I quote unquote I did a good job. I didn't want to like, but it's not, it wasn't for me. So I couldn't, I did that. And I also started my rabbinical track to become a rabbi. I was going to do both, lawyer, rabbi by 24, because that's what my brother did. My older brother did.
Mm-hmm.
But I also decided that I was doing it for the wrong reasons. Being a rabbi, just because it's cool was not the reason to be a rabbi. So I stopped that route. I know Jacob is very upset about that, and he would like me to resume my studies and become a rabbi, or demand that my grandfather make me a rabbi before he passes away. But both of those things are not going to happen. Or so maybe they will. But,
is that like a respect for your grandfather's, like, I don't know if you call it ministry, but like his service in Orthodox Judaism?
Yeah, I mean, he's respected, and in theory, that's something he could do. But like, no authority today would, let's say, recognize him. They'd be like, okay, that's an old man giving you, like, I don't really care about that. So at this point, so it's all good.
What got you into design? Was it just that made sense, or like an entrepreneurial endeavor, or?
While I was in law school, I was at the beginning of law school. I was working on the side, basically, or working on the side. I was working when I wasn't in school. I was working, and I was just married, and I had this sense of style, as they say. I don't know. And this guy noticed me and said, like, I like your style. Would you ever want to design a house? And I was like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, but he's like, I don't know. I have a good sense about you. And he invited me. He's like, I'm looking to, like, I was an architect designer in the States. I came over here. I want to establish my company over here. Would you do that with me? I'm like, I'm down for a ride, sure. And after like a while working with him, I'm like, okay, like it looks like you really want to build a whole business over here. And like, I can't do all those things. So like, I have a good friend who was studying economics, and I was like, you know what, forget that. Come play with me. So my friend joined, and we did that for like a while. Then I finished my schooling, and I'm like, okay, I gotta give this law thing like a chance. I did study law, so I left. And when I was gone and removed from this sort of situation, I started thinking and realizing a lot of sort of inconsistencies, issues, things I didn't like. And I was trying to approach it. And because I do owe him a tremendous, tremendous amount of gratitude, debt of gratitude for like him just like sort of quote unquote picking me up the street. Nevertheless, it remained to be very, very problematic working with this individual. Money games, lies. So, and in retrospect, I learned a lot of what not to do. And then my partner and I decided to like open up our own firm, and it'll be in August. It'll be 10 years.
Wow. Well, that's really interesting to go, that you found yourself more in alignment by choosing that path, maybe.
So what I would say is, definitely with regards to being my own boss and like sort of having control of my own life, I don't know how I'd go back right now to like working for someone like that. That would be, I think for me, it would be horrible. However, while I have a conflict because I'm quote unquote considered great at what I do, But as far as I'm concerned, it's sort of by accident. Like I happen to be good at this. Like it's not like I worked for years and like I looked at Frank Lloyd Wright and I was like studying motion and movement. I was like, these people love my ideas and like this person loves my ideas. So like, okay, great. So I don't know if it's imposter syndrome, but sort of like when I've in the past got asked to speak at some schools, I declined because I'm like, I'm not a good example of how to get to here. I'm like, because you can't, like, mine is not the route. Like, some charlatan gave me a chance, and like, I believed in myself. Like, that's not like that's you're not teaching that in class. So, like, I feel like I'm not necessarily a good representative of that. And also the fact that it's just, as far as my values, it's just so much money spent on like just nothingness, like on like the material aspect is hard for me. And like, I've spoken about this with my partner and my wife that, I don't know, like maybe I have 10 years left in me, maybe more. I don't know if I could do this for so long. It's just, it feels too empty, I guess, in a certain way. I'll have to see. I don't know. So far, this keeps the lights on.
Well, and, that, and I guess more in alignment, not totally aligned or whatever, you know? And I think that's interesting because that makes me think of like, you know, I don't want to, I don't, you have a reputation, it sounds like, of quality, and these schools wanting to bring you in, you know, did Steve Jobs go to school to become a computer designer, you know, type thing, like, or did Mark Zuckerberg go and get his degree in social media design? Like, those are the kind of things I think that actually, from a certain perspective, is more of how the world does work. Sometimes who you know, or a lot of times who you know, or a relationship is actually a bigger part of a career success than the training sometimes. Not that there's not value in the training or, having kind of a professional credentialing. I just think that is also a reality of the world, that relationships are also a big deal. And we kind of go through life pretending at colleges like, oh, no, here's your degree. And that's what they don't teach networking or from the class.
I missed the graduation of my law school graduation. I have yet to pick up the diploma. It's still there. Every time I pass by the school, I tell my wife, I joke around, I'm like, we could go in there. We could ask for it. She's like, okay, very funny. Like, okay. So
put it on the wall.
Like there's nothing, literally, like, I remember the day, like, as I finished the bar, I left and drove straight to like close my first client. Like, it was like, so like not like, oh, the bar, we finished. I see like people coming out, like vomiting, people crying. I'm like, okay, on to do this. There is a sense of, I do like, and this is aside from, I take pride at the fact that, and I thank my partner for, willing to play along, because it's difficult in this industry, but like, no commissions, no kickbacks, no games, just like, I want to get you from A to Z. You have many iotas in your life. I don't want you to be thinking about this if you don't have to. My hands on the wheel with you. Like when you said, like, I don't want to like find myself like in debt, like, yes, all those things. I want to do all those things. And your experience should be, hey, this was fantastic. And I'm like, yep, it was great. And I really like, thank God we managed to do that. And I'm very, very proud about sort of, making sure that people got a great experience and product. It happens to be that I designed your house. But as far as I'm concerned, I could have been selling you shoes. It's really, I want to make sure like the experience was great. And that comes with its own level of stress and demand that you have, let's say, from the subs you work with. But that, I feel like in my little slice of world that I could control, I want that to be oriented the best way possible.
I love that. That is, that to be able to, not everybody has maybe that inside of them or something, but for those of us, maybe
I think we all have it inside us. We don't know how to necessarily orient that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's probably true. I don't know. So I want to kind of like move into the TLC conversation. So I was telling you backstage that I think the last time we did this podcast was I had just had my first conversation with Brendan Graham Dempsey, and
Which
that was the first crossover from his channel to TLC land. And I told you about it, and you were like, I was like, he's talking about, meta religion, and you go, God's meta.
Right.
That line.
Said that,
And
okay.
I love that. It was fun. And so I was like, yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. And you engaging even in that kind of mic drop moment, I called it. It was fun. That I wanted to kind of get your fleshed out perspective on it, give you a place to do that, and for people in this space, because I think even people when Luke was on his channel, I said this, but I think others were saying this would be cool to hear Chezi have a conversation about this. And so I wanted to kind of like do this cybernetic thing, see what comes about. So yeah, what were your thoughts? Brendan Graham Dempsey, meta religion, metamodern Christianity, blah, blah, blah.
Okay, so like I told you backstage, the only way to have this conversation is if you have a beanie. It doesn't have to be on your head. Right? You could just be holding the beanie. Shots fired.
We see you, Brendan.
Exactly. We see you. But I mean, I think that was the most beautiful part, honestly. When I think I wrote a comment which is like, it's too late for Brendan. Like, that's it. He's been like TLC'd. And what he did, I can't remember who had this conversation with Paul. Maybe I'm forgetting who it is. It's some like big Christian YouTube guy. And he was having this conversation with Paul, but it was like a lot more chill. And he's like, this has been like the most like sort of relaxed conversation I've had. And like, there was something similar with Brendan, even when he quote unquote let loose. And he's like, I'm sorry about that. And you're like, it's all good. And he's like, oh, I could do that. And like, no one's trying to like, fight back at me in a certain sense. And that's what I think caught him off guard. And the fact that there was all this diversity, right? He's like, I noticed that there's like a lot of diversity, and I wasn't prepared for that. I would also say that the fact that you were caught surprised and off guard there could be said about biblical criticism, right? You have your own biases, obviously, when you come into these spaces. And just like the Bible is written in a specific time and context, we can't impose our modern way of thinking about it, right? And be like, oh, this must have what they meant, right? So even in the TLC, we're using our own specific language where you would think it's going to be a monolith, so to speak, but in reality, there's some Jews lurking around, right? It's very diverse. So I think that was just beautiful with regards. I'm talking about generally, not about the context about what they're talking about, but just the general onboarding, so to speak. Him doing the rounds, him being challenged, people showing like real interest, sort of about that. I wonder what that's also like for him, like talking to his wife is like, I don't know, all these people are just like asking me questions, but everyone read Brendan's book. But I think it was great for you to engage him. I think it's great that he engaged here. I think it gives not that we need this like validation, so to speak, from the outside, but it is interesting to see him sort of interact with it and think about that and engage with that. So I believe we'll probably see more of him. I would say and again, this is sort of, I think we'll touch about from a high level perspective of my thoughts about this with regards to if you want to verses of when it says camel, when it's talking about Beersheba, it didn't mean so we could do that. But I would say, it would be a great conversation with Yosef and Brendan, because Yosef is he's like Encyclopedia Brown. I'm dating myself. Whoever doesn't know who that is, he's just like a wellspring of knowledge. And somehow he's always he's always this article came out last week. He's like, I already read it fully. And I commented on it. And so he's in the know. So I think that his interaction with TLC will form his future engagements with other people with regards to how he takes metamodernity. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's been sort of a sense where he got a different perspective of it. I also think that a lot of it I think for years, or I don't know how long, but there's sort of pushback against it. So he feels like he's always like running uphill, right? And there's a sense which is like, how about you talk more about like how you now blend this with Christianity as far as in his perspective, which is like, you don't have to keep on running up the hill. Like it's fine. Like now let me walk with you. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. You did your homework and you're taking it seriously. So now like paint out to me like what that actually looks like. How do you like, if I'm not believing in anything, so to speak, right? Another 50 years worth of prayer service might feel tedious, right? I mean, so like what is keeping that thing going? So like, what's your roadmap, so to speak? But from, let's say, again, like a high level perspective, there was a few things that like I wanted to like touch upon, which is like, one is just, and again, my perspective is looking at the Jewish scriptures, but anything that's relevant over here that could be, extrapolated towards the New Testament, one is welcome to do so. But one is that, the Torah is not, it's a conceptual and an educational document, right? It's not a scientific one. And it's really, conveying like fundamental truths, right? So that humans are moral beings, the belief in God as the creator of the universe and his uniqueness, right? And these stories are tailored to really match the capacity of the ancient audiences, right? So it needs to do a balance between a scientific truth with a moral message and try to maintain the integrity of the moral message as well, right? So that is sort of high level dancing, and it's allowed to do so because it's not saying I'm a historical book. But that doesn't mean I can't make historical claims or references. It just means that is my focus, and people need to realize that. And you mentioned something that you're talking about as a young evangelical and your service and your singing and like sort of bringing rock into it. So I would say, in a certain sense, because people feel like this tension with evolution and creation. Right. While there's answers to that, like one day means 1,000 years, means 1,000,000 years. Like there's obviously those answers, but there's the Torah also emphasizes the principle of evolution, and sort of in our day-to-day life, we aspire towards redemption, and in our own consciousness, there's an evolution as well. So wanting to take on rock music, you could say it's ill-advised, but I would even say that is a form of evolution in a spiritual sense, right? Like we're looking constantly to grow and move forward. The snake and the serpent could definitely steer us to wrong directions, right? There could be a negative evolution, so to speak, which you would call, you wouldn't call it a negative evolution, would be a
mutation.
Exactly. But, or could become cancerous, obviously. But nevertheless, that spirit of evolution, both physically, as we say in our prayers, like that God renews the act of Genesis every single day, right? In every single cell and every single life, which sort of relates to evolution, but also from a spiritual perspective, we're constantly evolving. I believe we're constantly like evolving as well. Now, with regards to, let's say, the historical correlation of these interpretations, again, from a high level. So first of all, the science that he wants to use, right? So I would say that there's disagreements within the community, right? So people just say like, oh, the science is decided. Within the communities, there are disputes, okay, over like fundamental principles and assumptions. Second of all, even the documentary hypothesis is called an hypothesis, right? So like we're deciding that it happened, but it is only an hypothesis. And it doesn't mean we can't take it, consider it seriously or engage with it seriously, but that doesn't mean like if you hear it, that means like, oh no, this is the truth right now. It's an idea. And so it lacks it lacks the precise tools to make it like fully scientific, so to speak. I'd also say that obviously you have your own biases, right? And I think like Roy Klauser talks about this, right? When about how we're all looking, and this is also Jordan Peterson, about how I'm regressing for a moment, but Jordan has this idea that in a shorthand that the Bible is so fundamental, right? And it self-references itself. So just like Shakespeare and the English language is based on Shakespeare, so too, all of quote unquote the modern history that we have is all based on the Bible, because that's the first book and everything is being referenced from them, right? So there's this, I saw this once online, this debate between this pastor or this theologian and some scientists. And he's saying, he's like, I'm confident, but I don't believe. And the guy's like, no, you believe. And he's like, no, I'm confident. And then the theologian tells him, he's like, confident means confident, which means with trust. He's like, so or with belief. He's like, that's what you're doing. So there's a sense where a scientist is going to use a word or a frame, a point of reference, which is really already baked into a religious frame, or it's like we can't escape it, so to speak. So A, that's one version. Two, there's our own biases that we bring, right? If I'm assuming I'm against anything supernatural, or I'm deciding that, like, the Hittite, the Canaanites must have been X. So that's obviously going to lead to problematic interpretations. So again, I know he comes in very strongly with like, this is the science and these are the facts. So just like slow your roll, like it's definitely like appreciative and definitely need to take this thing seriously, but like we should just realize to take it with a grain of salt. I'd also say that, and this is true also like with modern scholarship, a lot of the archaeology and the biblical language like really does support a lot of the historical elements of the Torah. And I mean, many prophecies, the return of Israel to Zion, like all these things, like it's the probability of these things are very problematic. Like the fact that the Jewish people were like the most hated, the most dispersed, the fact that they come back 3 times to the land. So these are things that if you're talking about from a probability point of view, like what are you even talking about? This is like miraculous, right? So you could just shrug your shoulders, but you would have to contend with that. And that's just as serious and not more of a claim than like certain hypotheses that someone would bring forward, so to speak, I would say. Just to give, I don't want like Yosef to be mad at me or like Jacob. Well, Yosef to be mad at me if I'm not mentioning, but again, like the name of the gods and the name of the angels, and like I said, like camels and things like that. Many of these are the Canaanites and the Israelites share these names, and there could be that these things were imprinted onto each other, or there's a cross-pollination. That's all good, but they correlate to the time when that's happening. The stories of Abraham do correlate with the Bronze Age. The stories of Egypt correlate with what's going on at that time. And the fact that the Bible is using words that we see other kings at that time using, like the stretched arm of Pharaoh is being used as God. And that is a cultural appropriation. And many times that's what the Bible is doing in a certain sense, which is it is looking at other stories, other myths around them in a certain sense. And it could be one that the Israelites are the source of those stories at some point, right? Like the epic story of Gilgamesh doesn't mean that the story of Noah didn't happen. It could just mean it was interpreted that way according to that group. It could also be a larger narrative that was known to the Israelites or that people, and now the Torah or God is using that, right, to teach, right? I could decide to, like, why would God use that word? Why did God just not snap his fingers and we just understood everything? Why did God just not snap his fingers and we're already at the eschaton and it's over, right? So like God didn't have Netflix. He's looking for some action. He's looking for some drama, right? I say like, I'm holy, so be holy. I don't want to be alone and be holy, so to speak, right? So I'm retracting for myself. I'm allowing room for other people. There's freedom of choice. And now that that's happening, and just like I personally believe that, you could look at evolution, the story of Genesis, even if it's putting aside the fact that it could be allegorical, but it's also referencing once consciousness kicks in, that's the story, right? There's no point of having a discussion when it's still a bonobo, because that bonobo can't have a relationship with God. So in evolution, there's a sense where like, I want these things to be created, right? There's a 7th day, God rests, so to speak. And you could say that rest is going along with evolution. As consciousness kicks in, right? There's the point, there's that element, there's that time to have that conversation now. And then we could be introduced to the story of the Garden of Eden. We could be introduced to the whole issues that we have throughout all of Genesis of lack of communication from Adam and Eve, right? Not understanding what the serpent said, not understanding what they're saying to each other that leads to sin, through all the brothers fighting with each other, right? And that only gets fixed and redeemed with Joseph and his brothers, that eventually show that brothers that hated each other could ultimately find love, right? And once we know that humanity can do that, humanity can come together, then we start with the story of Exodus, the people of Israel. And like, now that we show that, how do we now turn that into a nation, turn that into a people, right? So,
go ahead. No, finish.
I was just going to say those stories run and these patterns run very, very deep. And I'll mention, I'm trying to think where to, am I going too much for this? You want to take a pause for this for a second?
No, I was just going to see if you watch the O'Connor Peterson?
Yeah, sure.
Because this, I mean, you're kind of like,
but what do you mean by that?
So when they were talking about, like, you just got to the Exodus, but that was one of the things. It's like, well, was there an actual Exodus that is tied to the literal Exodus? And what would, the
answer is
yes. And how did you feel about that engagement? Because I think that's kind of relative here. For people that have watched that, and a lot of people in this space probably did. So
I thought that was a fantastic engagement. I think that is giving us, that was sort of a return a little of Jordan Peterson, the teacher, the professor, and not Jordan Peterson like the meme, right? And it's so many layers. He's like, but you know what I mean? He's like, well, what do you mean? But you know what I mean? And he meant was like, I am curious. And once he meant like, I am genuinely curious, then the mask fell and he's like, oh, well, like, I don't know what it means. And like, what does a Christian mean? And then he stops. He's like, that's a good question, right? He tells him like, when would I be able to define I'm not a Christian? When would I feel like I am a Christian? And for a second, there isn't the automatic Jordan Peterson. There's like, that's a struggle. So that is where you want the conversation to go. And I agreed with Tunji, which is that conversation ended. Like, you never need to watch the Sam Harris again. You don't have to watch all the Penburn conversations that they had. Like, all those conversations are in the past. They mean nothing. They're relics at this point. Alex represents the new, we don't want to, he says like, I'm not calling myself the new atheist. Great. I qualify this as the Talmud in a specific tractate talks about how once you denounce idol worship, you're considered a Jew, right? Which is like, this is one step, or as we say, you go through like 50 different levels of heresy until you break out to the other side. So this is like another level of heresy pierce, and we're just getting closer to this conversation emerging. And it's if Russell Brand has now become a Baptist, right? So Alex O'Connor is, he didn't do that, but this for him is just as transformative in his level right now.
Yeah, so I think that he became Catholic. I think Brand did. But the other piece is that this is funny because I'm like, tell me about this kind of Jewish, and you're like Baptist Catholic. but the interesting thing is that the way that he set up to get Jordan to actually speak to him, like in the conversation, was, I am tired of debating. He said, I want to actually learn I'm tired of approaching every conversation as a debate. And so what you were talking about, like removing a level of idolatry, he removed the level of always wanting to be right to a desire for understanding, true understanding. And I thought that was extremely powerful. And like you're saying, that's a paradigm shift in the conversation from
for sure
7 years ago. So
I agree. I think that's like, I think we're correct. We're moving to like a new, excuse me for a second. I see my wife writing to me on the computer for a second.
It's fine.
Okay. Sorry about that. These are okay. So just specifically about the, toggling back to the story about the Exodus. So yes, I believe it happened. The numbers, the numbers are debated. There's more than enough archaeological evidence where you could say that there's very good reason to believe that went down. Now, one has to feel comfortable, and this is sort of where I would embrace modern modernity, or say like this is where we need to learn how to contend with these things, which is, okay, who are the Israelites? Are they all Hebrews? There's a group called the Habiro. There's a group called the Yaakov El group that comes from Canaanite, and maybe these two groups merge together. So like, those are ideas that you have to be able to play with. The fact that, let's say, are phylacteries. There are some that believe, let's say the Zohar in Kabbalistic texts, believe that these are phylacteries that we took, we did, again, a cultural appropriation of what was going on in Egypt, right? The parchments that are inside, they correlate with different spheres in the tree of life, of the emanations of Kabbalah, which also correlate to the serpent and the eagle that the Pharaoh had on his head, right? So again, this is taking a technology and reoriented, reappropriating. Same thing that happened with the cherubs, right? So we're talking to a nation, we're talking to people in a specific time, and we're going to use those elements. And at the same time, we're going to also stress how they're different, right? So I'm taking the cherubs, right, which is the chariot of the gods. So you'd come and be like, so this is just like the other nations around us. What's interesting, the fact that the tabernacle is the same size as Ramesses II's war camp, right? And then the fact that there's the cherubs inside, I'm taking from these two different cultures and I'm combining them, and there's nothing on the cherub, nothing sitting on top of the ark. It's empty. That's the stress. That's the revelation. That's why it's so different than everyone else. But the only way I could stress that difference is if I'm using the cultures around me. So that appropriation is not a bug, it's a feature, right? And when we talk about but there's contradictions and there's duplications. So we have to realize that these are not necessarily evidence to different sources, but these are reflections of the Torah's complex narrative, right? Or it needs to deal with both the lunar cycle and the sun cycle, which regards to the land, right? So there's both a spiritual, and it has to start playing with two of these calendars. So you'd be like, no, it means it was wrong in the summer solstice. And no, it also means that, yes, they're aware, just like the Egyptians and the pyramids were aware of Orion's belt. So we're not blind to that, but these things all come into proper orientation, right? So we say in our prayers, that God created the moon and the sun, and then gave them authority in this world, right? So there's a sense where we understand why the nations of the world would look at the sun and Ra and see power, because there is tremendous power in the sun. We also understand that God has given that power in the sun. So that's why when I think of someone worshiping the sun god, in a certain sense, at an earlier stage, that too is another level of idol worship removed. And because there's historical evidence of, at that time, a specific pharaoh that also sort of moved towards this monotheistic sort of understanding, an early version of it of one god or just a sun god. So there are two you could see. Someone understanding there's more to this, right? I understand that these are intermediaries. So Judaism even hints to this, where we understand that two of these things can be true at the same time, where we understand that the pagan reaction or the pagan sentiment is very, very strong, and there's a truth element to it. However, at some point, Abraham smashes the idols because he's looking for the real thing, right? As the Midrash says, he saw the moon, he saw the sun. There must be a king to this palace, right? There has to be something more to this. So we have to realize, again, these duplications don't mean that necessarily. Now, where I will, and this is, I guess, where Jacob would be calling me a heretic, is how far I want to stretch myself and how far I want to be able to toggle, right? And I say, I want to adopt the toggling element or concept where I look at modernity, at science, and I see where if I could incorporate it into my understanding, it makes sense to me to do. That doesn't necessarily, and once I do that, and there's different levels of interpreting this, I do that because I believe it's true, one level. I do that because if I do that and I manage, as Rabbi Cook says, manage to remove the thorn from the rose, right? So then it's no longer scary. I have it in my little box, which I've dealt with, and now I can continue worshiping and the way I was, and continue in that relationship. And I know that those things, quote unquote, have been covered. Now, there are times when you are faced with an issue, and the question is, do you toggle and suddenly take that information and place it on? I understand that it's not easy to do that necessarily. And maybe in Judaism, there's more of a tradition that allows you to play around with that. But I would recommend people sort of exercise that muscle, because as you and I discussed in the past, and you alluded to Brendan, which is, once you're exposed to everything, right? That will be in the mode where it's sort of survival mode. I'm not even talking about how do I integrate it and actually believe it. Then you definitely want to be in the place where, like, can I just take the thorns out of this? Because right now I just didn't make sure this is not puncturing this whole bubble. And forget you and I, right? It's talking about the kids, right? How are they taking this on? So how do you teach this to your kids? So, and I mentioned this to Jacob on a comment, which is Jacob had this argument with a rabbi that's sometimes on his server. And Jacob said that he would still be able to, how did he frame it? That it doesn't contradict the 13 principles of faith if you believe that Abraham didn't really exist. And the rabbi was like, no way. This rabbi asked a third-party rabbi that Jacob knows as well, which both of them agree is, let's say, a very knowledgeable rabbi. And that rabbi said, no, that's true. And the previous rabbi sort of understood that and accepted that, which is also beautiful. But I would argue that ultimately the red line is Sinai. That's the red line. The red line, as far as I'm concerned, is that there was that story of the revelation at Sinai, right, which is unique and unparalleled, and in any other story, and the fact that the people of Israel, like the fact of our survival, right, despite all the adversity, this also suggests divine providence. And there are sages, like medieval scholars, so you're talking about, let's say, 12th century already, that are talking about how Moses didn't necessarily have to write every single line. Maybe these portions he didn't write. These portions were added later on. There are some rabbis that don't say that explicitly, but you could deduce from their verse saying, but ultimately what we need to believe in, that it's a divine message from God, that there was a core of it in Sinai, and then the prophets later on added it, or other prophets later on added it, or redactors with divine revelation decided to what's going to put there together. And even if you say the hypothesis theory, you want to accept that. So you're saying that there's these 5 different authors that are all agreeing on the same story. Great. Then it even more makes sense that there's something true to the story, because these 5 different groups are saying that the story is true. So now,
and that's a different, or I guess, I don't know if it's postmodern or a metamodern way to kind of approach truth. Like because the way I was raised was that it's true because this is the way it's written, versus it's true because
it's
God, and that the reality of what they're pointing at, some reality that they're pointing at happened.
Correct.
And that the evidence of that causes great effect into people's lives for thousands and thousands of years, like even today, so it's like,
I mean, I would argue that ultimately, like, the war in Israel, what undergirds it is religious tensions, going all the way back to Abraham. Well, going all the way back to the laughter, because Isaac in Hebrew is, we will laugh. And the attitude over there is, which is, right now, the world is still not complete, and we can't actually laugh because we're not there yet. And outside the tent, Ishmael was waiting, and Israel laughed. And the sense was like, you are laughing now in reality, and you're thinking it's over and it's done, and not recognizing, sort of in that context, the reality that there's a shift right now, which is Isaac was just born into the world, and what that means, and the mission, how it's continuing. And there's a tremendous place for Ishmael, which is the hearing God, right? That's what the name means, Ishmael. It's such a powerful name, and it's very upsetting that it left sort of the Jewish tradition. Like, you still have rabbis in the Talmud called Rabbi Ishmael, but no one calls their son Ishmael today, just because of the context. And it's such a loss. But the son of Abraham holds a tremendous amount of force, and really is an example in a certain sense to the world of the intensity of devotion to God, right? So and just like I was going to say, like the students, the protesters, there too, they're starting to be very inspired about that. But those tensions are still there. And again, and I would say in 1948, that nerve got pressed again, which is like to biblical criticism, right? And in a certain sense, for Christians, the authenticity of the Jewish story, forget the interior tension that we have, is still what's undergirding the Christian story, right? So like that is, it cannot be denied. And just like Maimonides said, Christianity and Islam are path makers for Messiah because they too cannot be denied. Like these phenomenons that are a continuation, they must be recognized. They must be reckoned with.
One of the things that was floating around in my mind in coming to this conversation today was, because it's something that I'm having to, as a Christian, Christians sometimes, with their relationship with Judaism or Jews, depending on a lot of different contexts of everything, but that, at least how I've been formed in my thinking and my understanding, just was, how can you deny the relevance? How can you deny the relationship? How can you deny the brotherhood or sisterhood of this reality, because of what we believe we share? And then and I was thinking about the Christian New Testament being partnered with the Jewish scriptures, Bible, and then and I was thinking in my mind, so like, okay, 1700 or 2000 years, and then I was thinking Islam's about 1,000 years after Christ's time, roughly.
I think it's like 500 years.
Okay, so then and so then it got me thinking, like, what's a parallel today? And I was thinking something like, for Christians, the feeling of Mormonism, having another text, trying, like, partnering, like trying or connecting to the heritage of Christian text, connecting to the heritage of the Israel text, and just how I wonder generally, because I don't have a lot of people to ask this question to. I know how kind of the something like Orthodox, small o Orthodox Christianity, general sentiments towards Mormonism. I wonder if that is a similar feeling that like some parts of Judaism feel about Christianity. If that's even a kind of a parallel.
I mean,
I don't know if you've ever, because that's so far beyond like your necessity.
Like Judaism has many concerns from Christianity, right? Like years of missionary work, the Crusades. You guys were so angry, and they're so a lot of libels, a lot of tension, obviously. So that is part, in a certain sense, that is Judaism. Exile Judaism, evolved in a certain sense in a reaction also to Christianity, right? So, and that's why the things that are quote unquote positive about Christianity or Jesus, they are hidden throughout so many layers. So like to find conversations that are more sympathetic, right? One has to look for that. So there are movements that are working towards removing all the apologetics and having real conversations, which is like, okay, how does Judaism deal with Christianity? So like an extreme would be, on the positive would be this rabbi named the Meiri, a great sage and like a quote unquote a heavy hitter. And the way he sees Christianity, right, he already qualifies Christianity as considered a Noahide religion. So that is like a tremendous statement, right? To come and say like, okay, like you're basically like in the club. Now you'd be like, oh, but there's still differences. He's not quibbling about that. He's not quibbling about how is it possible that they don't have to keep the commandments, but still, and he's like, it doesn't matter because they're still living a moral life. Those Christians who are living a moral life, insert Jordan Peterson into be like, what's a real Christian, right? So like you could debate what that means, but the concept is assuming you are oriented properly, right? So you're all good in the hood. And now there are others like Maimonides who'd be like, no, it's definitely idol worship. However, I still see it as a path maker, as in I see a divine element over there. Ironically, he comes and says Christianity, idol worship, Islam, monotheism. However, conversations with Christians, okay. Conversations with Muslims, no good. Because conversations with Muslims deny, they have the tahrif. They believe that we changed our Torah. We don't have the real document anymore. So it's very hard to have any conversation because you're basically saying everything I'm saying is lies. With Christians, you affirm the Old Testament. We quibble about the facts right now, but I could still engage with you. So while, according to Maimonides, who again, in the context of where he is born and growing up, which is a very Muslim Arab area, he's not dealing with Christians. So obviously that's going to have biases. Later rabbis went potentially further and talked about, again, like using words, which is, it is possible that other religions are going to have other prophets and they're going to do other miracles. Like, right, our Torah has place for that. The issue the Torah has is it's not, can he do miracles and can he be a prophet? Because we know of real prophets with real power that are no bueno. Are you here to say, like, Muhammad, in theory, could be considered a prophet as far as Judaism concerned, if, forget this whole thing about not that you're the next prophet, you're the last prophet and greater than Moses, right? We can't accept that. And we can't accept that you're here to replace the Torah. If you're going to claim, which there are earlier claims of this, or that Muhammad came and has the Quran to bring the Torah message to the Muslim world, and it's written in that context, we're all great. If you see yourself as a prophet and divine through God, that's also okay, as long as you're oriented properly, right? So I would say that as far as Judaism, that is only a new conversation that's emerging and needs to be spoken about more. However, it still requires a tango from the other side, right? It requires a dance partner. So in Christianity, I think we've gone further with that conversation, which is indicative also with just like the relations we see around the world, but also even conversation like this. Like, we wouldn't be able to have a conversation like this with, or it's very difficult to have a conversation like this with our Muslim brothers. And this goes to all the way to a quote I mentioned in the past, but how Rabbi Mini too talks about that, there can't be two Israels. And, at this point, we're getting to a place where, like, both we need to look at the Christians to better understand ourselves. The Christians need to look at us and better understand themselves. And you could say those are movements with like, Paul through Judaism, all those percolations are that's happening. And I would even say Alex O'Connor, like I said about the Bible, that's another layer of idolatry being removed. Now, this might be controversial. I would say that Jesus is, in the best sense, a attempt to okay. So in the best sense, and again, this is very controversial to say, he is a failed instantiation of the the Messiah, son of Joseph, which you have multiple versions of that. And there will be, again, like, there are rabbis that saw Theodore Herzl, as another Josephite Messiah, right? In a certain sense. 12 apostles, 12 sons, Judas, the tension between Judas and him. And then in the Bible, the tension between Joseph and the tribe of Judah. So that's like a pattern that's potentially repeating itself again. Right. The Bible the temple gets destroyed. There's a vacuum. There's a need to bring up another version of it, but it fails potentially. Now I would say that's an idolatry that needs to be removed. However, I am open to the interpretation, and I think you're seeing a little of that, which is like the monarchical vision, or the concept that, the Trinity was a misinterpretation of some of the concepts of emanations or instantiations that we understand in the Zohar. But it could be that the term or the concept could still be held by Christians, but understood in a way that still fits, sort of qualifies all boxes. I don't know how to do that dance. And to me, there's maybe a part of me that wants like sort of a kumbaya where it's like, it's not so painful for like the sticker to be ripped off. But I would say that it's as painful as this process is right now, in my estimation. I think like the Brendan Dempsey, like coming into the conversation and being like oriented or being accepted in a certain sense requires this expansion of thinking. It requires multiple discs spinning. Like potentially you could say a conversation with Chezi and his theology gives me Christian Baxter, and this is just an example. Maybe everything I said over here was nonsense and not helpful at all. But you could say like I use Chezi's toolbox now to deal with like Brendan's claims, right? So I would be like, okay, so that is, in my sense, like those layers being taken off because now you're adapting different ways of thinking about your relationship with God and religion. And I believe that there's unity with multiplicity. Like we're not all supposed to be Jews. We're not all supposed to look the same. You're supposed to have your own unique relationship with God. And as an individual, you could reach higher heights than the high priest. But I do believe that slowly but surely, there's going to be an alignment in a certain sense with Judaism. And I believe like the things we're seeing right now are elements of that. That doesn't mean that Judaism doesn't have what to appreciate and learn from Christianity and culturally how it developed.
Thank you. The part that kept kind of coming back to me is the difference that really stuck with me in that conversation versus like talking about Islam and Christianity in relationship to Judaism was the different at a very foundational level, something like one group believing that that Judaism changed scripture versus the idea that Jesus fulfilled scripture. Like that fundamentally is a huge difference because it's from the Christian perspective, like there's not a contradiction into the past, so
that's also true in the Quran. There are many verses that relate to the Torah.
Right.
Now they'll say like, but that's not what you have anymore. So in theory, the Muslims agree as well. However, in practice, they'll be like, well, but you don't have it anymore. So
that would be the difference, just on a very. That's really where I could that I was like, well, why does it seem possibly easier? But I also have I'll just state this because I know like when I've had conversations just the internet, the way the internet is and the way the culture is, and with for whatever the many or not so many or the reasons people feel like they need to have negative opinions about Judaism, it always, I guess it's bothered me. And what even within like the Reformation, that over time, I think Martin Luther was known to have some pretty anti-Semitic.
He was a silly goose.
Thoughts. And I, again, I have a very simplistic understanding of this. Something like, oh, well, the Jews killed Jesus. And that, as a good Protestant myself, I always found that very, like, in a historical sense, a trial, but the Christian sense is, from what I've always believed, was that sin killed Christ, and that we all struggle with sin or something like that. And so to me, that, and I don't know if I'm saying things that are negative, but that to me is what I didn't understand. That it just does, the argument didn't make sense on that level, because that is what it seems like. Sometimes it's like trying to blame a people versus the thing that I was taught to believe, which was that Christ took on ultimately. So that's kind of for me.
You're roiding for a second. We'll wait patiently. Christian is a good dude. He's doing great work. I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying him. Jacob, be gentle when you're lambasting me on my heretical stance. And like, Christian's like all nervous. He's like bugging out. This is not working. Now I'm here alone. Hello, TLC. I'm proud of all of you.
And we are back. Sorry about that. I'll have to do a real edit on that one. That was a long time. I don't know what the last thing you heard was. I was monologuing, but
yeah, I missed like a minute or two of that.
Well, I was just saying that I was talking about like Martin Luther is known for anti-Semitic.
Okay, so that I heard, and how like it would be strange that didn't make sense that they blame it on the Jews. I mean, it's built into the tension, which is like you're blaming the Jews, and the man himself is a Jew,
right? And then the idea that to believing that it's actually the sin of humanity that kills, that is like it was like a spirit of sin, not a people and so that I've always not, that's never settled for me or been something that I've agreed with just from my very basic kind of Protestant sensibilities. So I don't know.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that's just never been something that I've thought was a right way to view how things happen in history theologically.
I agree, and there's also some context needs to be taken into consideration, which is like the group in charge then at the temple. Talk about the Pharisees, but Jesus was a Pharisee, right? So like those were his boys. He was dealing with the Karaites, right? So they had a really big. They were in power at the time. While they were a minority, they had political power, and they like. This is something that Sam Tiedemann talks about, but like Rabbi Akiva, for example, and even many of the Pharisees, their understanding of the Messiah is not so far off from, let's say, what Jesus was claiming and talking about, and being like a representative, and so and there being a person. Even the two powers in heaven were a conversation that was being had in the milieu. Right, talking about Metatron being over there. There's different versions of that, basically, but they weren't in power. So first of all, the people that like sort of called him out, you have to realize that's not like, because Pharisee Judaism turns into rabbinical Judaism is like what we have today. So like for all intents and purposes, I'm representing them right now, right? So like my understanding is much closer to Jesus's understanding at the time than it was with the rabbis he was dealing with at the time, the Karaites, right? So those aren't the classic Pharisees that we're talking about, because the Talmud deals with those understandings. So we have to put that in context when we blame the Jews, quote unquote, which we know, the Romans were involved and they ended up doing it, but even their involvement, right, wasn't, let's say, mainstream Judaism, so to speak, at the time. While we could still tell Jesus, like, well, but then you died, so I guess you're not the dude, right? Like, so Rabbi Akiva looks at Bar Kochva and says, like, this is Messiah. And then he dies. He's like, and he's not Messiah anymore because he's gone, right? So that sort of, that tension was there, but people were more sympathetic to that idea. Obviously, we're not aware of that. As Christians are getting more into Paul within Judaism and that understanding, so then these texts are starting to sort of to emerge and come out.
So, which is all more to your point about just what is it? Even in our email interactions, the one language or one voice,
in one accord.
Yeah.
In Zephaniah they speak about that, right? We all come to the temple, we pray to God in one accord. And in Shechem Echad also means like in one, it really means one chest, that we're like sort of embracing each other. But again, it through multiplicity. Rabbi Cook talks about how fortunate we are that God has given multiple sparks to the world, where like each one could blossom into its own unique version and language to relate and talk to God, right? And while God might have a unique message of revelation, right, that doesn't mean that itself. And we know that the prophets themselves had their revelation at different levels of clarity. Sometimes they contradict each other. Sometimes they offer using, let's say, string theory or like is very big in Marvel right now, like, right, the multiverse, right? So there are multiple options, right? The exile could continue for ages. It could end immediately, right? So it really requires, like, will we build a third temple? Like, when we all want to do it, we'll do it. So, like, that mindset is miraculous. Like, I don't think it falls down from heaven. I think it requires a galvanizing force. And part of me thinks, like, even when I look at Israel right now and the debacle it's in, this too is for the good. I hope. It's very hard for me to see it now, but I hope that this means the growth of something new, of a new Jew, in a certain sense, which is hoping to start acting in his full potential. Right? We talk about how Jacob, when he goes up and down the ladder, the Midrash talks about how the angels see him and they're like, "Who's this dude? This guy's a joke. Like, we're going to kill this guy." He doesn't look at all like the Jacob that we see in heaven. And the attitude is, we all have our version of us here, and our soul is still tethered to our, or you guys will call it the whitening stone, so to speak, right? I still have this version of me back there. That is my full potential, right? I could look like that if I only orient myself properly. But when Jacob is in his early stages, he doesn't even resemble that face, right? Because there's still so much more to grow. So do I think, like, is Israel 1948, all of that is like, is divine and prophetic? Yes. Do I think that we're still resembling Jacob? And ironically, and maybe I mentioned this last time, there's Jacob, which is our religious identity. There's Israel, which is our national identity, which is also Jacob, right? The name switch. And there's Jeshurun, which is our universal identity. And we have yet to step into that. But one would think that if the world is looking at us and the whole world is looking at us, and if there's a meme says all eyes on Rafa, and the fact that, like, I have to deal with this tension of this other people that are actually, like, part of, like, my whole community biblically, that is a universal leader would need to take control of that and deal with that. It's very much what the world is sort of asking for. Like, hey, Israel, disappear so we don't have to deal with this tension anymore, or be amazing, solve the tension, do the thing, like, do all the things that you could do. But those are the two options we have. Like, we can't be just like, and it's just like Switzerland, and, like, their shekel is low right now. Like, no one's interested in that. And that's an annoying story for people as well. So, and that's why right now, like Israel as the bad guy, then, like, maybe that's the narrative we'll take. And that narrative was right, that, like, it's a problematic people that causes issues. And, like, ultimately, like, it also was, its reason was the removal of God from earth in a certain respect. And that, again, that's just a pattern of the misbehavior of the Israelites removes the temple. So here too, again, the misbehavior removes this concept from us. It removes revelation, prophecy from us. So here too, now the Jew again is causing death and destruction, or removing morality from what's going on over here. Obviously, there's other arguments on the other side, but I think the burden is on us. We have to emerge glorious. And the infighting Israel has right now between its own, like, are we secular? Are we religious? Are we democratic? How do we do that balance? That is our own personal identity, right? That's every Jew, but in the nation of Israel itself, asking itself, who are we? Like, I'm fighting out a fight right now, but I also have to say, like, why am I here? Am I a colonist? What am I doing? Like, what's my relation to this land?
I don't remember. I just recently was listening to someone talk about how, I wish it was just a day or two ago, I can't remember what video or what I was watching, but that the same kind of thing for the United States, saying, oh, we're trying to, spread democracy in the Middle East. Like, what? No, it's actually religious underneath. Like, and that,
but they don't see it that way. That's the problem.
Yeah, and the identity is misplaced, like you're saying, I think, and that is, it's very similar to what you're talking about, and kind of like the Tom Holland thing. Like, no, you don't realize, it's this Christian tradition that you're actually, and then to even undergird that, what's beneath the Christian tradition, we would agree on.
It's on your money.
Yeah.
In God we trust.
Yes.
Right. Imagine, again, like, there's Caesar on the money, right? This is the coin. Imagine what that is for the world at the time, saying like all of this, ultimately what undergirds this is God. So we're going to make up this fictional bill, which is tethered to like gold, whatever it is. And we're going to believe that this system is all happening through divine providence. So that is the proper hierarchy for money. Not like, hey, let's just print more of this. Just keep on printing and printing and printing. And this means nothing anymore. And people, so that's a crazy inversion, right? But like I would say, so if America was still going out to the world and saying, in God we trust, right? If that's the first level, then downstream from there, things would break down differently. But if that's not your guiding principle, then Afghanistan.
And even the people that, are supposed to know what they're fighting for don't know what they're fighting for. And the other piece that I was wanting to bring this back to Jordan Peterson, and then to, because I love talking to you about Jordan Peterson.
Sure.
is again his new book title. And we hit on this last time, but everything, is, and just how he kind of, your experience with him in our last
Wrestling
conversation
with God, you're talking about.
Yes. And that even, and we pointed back to this O'Connor conversation, and that again, it is, and that he's he knows, he doesn't, he knows what the hell he's doing. You know what I mean? Like he's
Jordan?
Not, to a degree, like he's not stupid. He's not just like, oh, I'll just name it this because I'm, he's conscious of some things, I think, about why, what he's doing and not doing, and what he's specifically not doing.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say that. So Jordan Peterson, he emphasizes that, like, to be Israel is to wrestle with God, right? And he's arguing that by the sacrifices, I'm presenting the highest value, and that benefits my future self, right? I'm sacrificing the now for then, and this is like akin to walking with God. I was mentioning this to someone on Discord recently. He was asking me like the difference between like modern Orthodoxy and like Jordan Peterson's views. So I would just say, like, in Judaism, that like I just mentioned earlier in the recording over here, that like interpreting the Bible metaphorically, again, in modern Orthodoxy, is common and like it's a valid move, but it would behoove Jordan to remember, and I think he spoke about this. He did address this when he spoke in Israel, that Israel's also a real nation, right? That's me. It's more than just like a metaphor. Like the Jewish people historically embody these metaphors, and like the wrestle with good and that is going to prevail. That's like the Jewish people historical role, right? So it's not that these metaphors and him using them is not like that's a valid move, but he also needs to recognize that like there's a nation behind them, and that's a real people, right? So he'd be like, this is what it means. My book means like it's a metaphor. I'd be like, that's true. And also the actual people of Israel, namely Chezi Spero, representing all Israelis. But if there's not a picture of me, it wasn't there. By the way, this is also like, his order and chaos is something that we call wholeness and progress, right? So there could be wholeness would be like in the order, and progress would be in the chaos, right? Which I need to be in that place where he needs to be. And again, his concept, like his focus on Jesus, we do believe that like an individual could change the world, right? And he does need to take on responsibility, but like we reject the necessity for suffering because of like sinfulness, right? Like we could repent. King David, the Talmud says, doesn't sin because he repents. So obviously there's like a divergence over there, which like we have to realize like it's not all broken. Like you could fix the world, and our job is to actually to fix the world. So like, there are some differences, but generally speaking, like, we're fans of Jordan Peterson. And I believe, I genuinely believe this, just like Maimonides, when he's like 27, he doesn't really talk about, he doesn't drop that he's being inspired by his Muslim inspirations and like Aristotle, for example. He just says, accept the truth from he who says it, right? He says, like, I did all the research you needed to do. He goes even crazy. He's like, you don't even need to learn the Talmud anymore. He's like, I broke it all down for you. But he was, that's why we call him the Great Eagle. He was just like such a powerhouse, at doing that at 27. It was crazy. Later on, like in his 50s, he writes the Guide to the Perplexed, or in Hebrew, it's the guide for the embarrassed. Basically, someone that's dealing with like the world philosophies and Judaism. He's like, but I feel these tensions. So Maimonides says, I will write a book to help the person that's confused, embarrassed, perplexed. I'll guide him through it. Very dense book. But there he speaks about how, Aristotle, as far as he's concerned, is like the closest thing a human can get to a prophet, right? Like that is he holds him in a very, very high regard. So, and the dialogue of Maimonides with Aristotle, I think, is ultimately part of like the words of God becoming more clear. And here too, Jordan Peterson is another instantiation of that, of the words of God as like him conversing in his round table, right? Like the biblical series, the round table with Jordan, like specifically with Prager and Shapiro, even though they're both lightweights with regards to, let's say, theology and talking to Jordan Peterson, I think like that is the word of God, being discussed, being mulled over, and everyone benefits from that. We move on to higher and better understandings of God, I believe, ultimately.
Yeah, and him not even being technically a part of either of those spaces is kind of, that is it by bringing them
he's
together.
Christian after that O'Connor conversation. Like if you're telling me like that Jesus came out of the grave, then you're Christian.
Yeah, that
I don't know what people else want him to say, but like this, he's giving it to you. He's saying like, I believe this story is true. You're like, okay, so great.
There are probably obviously a lot of Christians people that claim Christianity that would still have problems with a lot of things, a lot of more.
Well, he would say that they're not being Christian, and this is true about like when Kanye West comes out and says like, Hollywood, like Jews, like I would say like they're not being Jewish. They're Jewish by ethnicity, right? Mm-hmm. But like they have a Christmas tree in their house. I feel bad about saying this because Jonathan the Noahide said that he has a Christmas tree, and he understands like now through his reading that that's not considered like paganism. Like I would agree that he doesn't have to worry about having that in the house because of what it is culturally. That being said, no Orthodox Jew who deals with the tension of one's being Christian has like, my kids don't celebrate Christmas. They see it like on TV and they ask me about like, what's with this holiday, right? But that's not a holiday we celebrate over here. Even if I was quote unquote secular, because that's not part of my gig. So I would say that they don't represent Judaism.
Hey, Dad, what's with this cool holiday where people get lots of presents?
No, we have Hanukkah. We have 7 days.
I know.
Right.
But let's add this one because there's more presents involved.
My son, it wasn't even my 10-year-old son. He was watching this thing. It was about Santa. Mm-hmm. He looked at me and he pointed. He's like, Santa? And I was like, and like, that was it. That was the discussion, which is like, not like, you don't have to go down that route. Like, this is not a real man. So don't worry about this.
Oh man.
And that was enough for him. He was like, are we down? I'm like, we're not.
I'm sorry, that got me tickled a little bit. The thing I guess I would be interested in, you briefly touched on this, but getting your reaction to some of the Roy Clauser stuff that was in. I don't know if that was meaningful to you or interesting to you. I guess I just was curious if there were parts of it that you thought were interesting.
Generally speaking, like, the guy's fairly chill with regards to like, he wanting, if again, I'm not like a student of his, but like, the mix of, let's say, modernity and, these texts, like he's generally open to like, playing this game and interpreting these things. His big move, if I remember correctly, mentioning sort of like, again, they can't escape that narrative that it's all like religious in a certain perspective. And like, even the atheist is religious, right? So like, he's just using that in his own frame. It was an interesting conversation. You have to remind me, I'm sorry, I just don't remember like,
I guess that there's one of the Christian aspects is saying that like the reformers were more closely, big reformers, namely he would say like Luther and Calvin had a doctrine of God that was more in line with Christian historical orthodoxy than, say, Catholicism. So that was like the technical Christian side of it. But then he also was, he kind of points to, and CW is obviously the expert on this topic, but that the reality of God is philosophically related to our experiences as persons, like something along those lines. And
so in theory would mean, which is, even in reality, if God doesn't exist, the perception is that God exists, right? So that's a crazy claim. That kind of claim does exist in Judaism in some places. Sorry, Jacob. It's Rabbi Cook.
I don't think he was making that claim, but that.
Oh, okay. I'm just saying, when you're saying that, like, you're saying
Sure,
it's
that's what
persons.
yeah, but
saying,
that,
like,
I think he's saying there is that God, that there is a real God, but that our understanding or our belief isn't completely defined by I'm probably gonna butcher this, by argument, I guess. It's defined by have you had, do you have an experience with this that causes you to believe that that's true? I think that's closer to it.
This would go back into what we were saying when I mentioned, let's say, the extended revelation idea, right? So the concept that the Torah is from heaven, right? That is really a focus on the divine message rather on the specifics of how it was delivered, right? So like, Sinai is my red line, but the attitude is that, like, those are Moses' concept, the prophets, the leaders, later on, these things, like, people are connecting to the same wavelength each time. And they're bringing down their message. They're bringing down what their interaction was with this. So that to me is sort of, that is a back pocket move, so to speak, to have. That's very hard to tell your mom. Like, my mom can't play with that. And I don't know if it's smart to go around and tell my mom, hey, mom, but look at this, but you should do this. Like, she'd be like, but you're breaking down my sandcastles. Like, don't do that. Now, what I'm saying is, like, you're right. Like, in that kind of sense, like, I just need to believe that there's sand, right? Like, then build any castle you want, but the sand is my thing. That's not enough for people. That's too, it just slips between my fingers. Like, I need more of a structure. So, again, I do believe that the toggling is a tool that people need to work on. And again, if people need to think about it as like removing the thorn and then putting it away, and like, I don't have to dive into this so much more now, and I could keep on doing my practice, that's fine. And in a rainy day, remind yourself, like, but there's still sand. Like this. So
I definitely feel like that describes my interaction with Brendan because the first time was like, oh yeah, I studied some of this historical critic. Like he was like, people in this space, I don't know if they know that they're getting into, like, because of, right. And mainly because of Jordan Hall. And I mean, Jordan can easily contend with that when he looks it up, the next right. day and figure that out for himself. But I was just like, yeah, I mean, even as a very conservative, considered very kind of biblicist, like not a lot outside of it. That my professors in my undergrad exposed us to it. And even like my church history professor was like, our text was written by an atheist that we used. So he had that we were like interfacing with at a very conservative, compared to his experiences even at Yale. But that, I'm just saying, people are exposed to this stuff.
Yeah, but I would ask you, how, let's say you think, you know what, Chezi, this makes sense. Like, toggling does make sense. How does Christian explain that to his child? Because your teachers aren't doing that. Like, where you're sending it to school, right? Yeah. And more than that, you probably sent it to school where you thought, like, that's not going to happen. Like, I need a place where he's, like, quote unquote, going to be safe from
the context of rural Arkansas, America is still very culturally Christian, even in the public spaces.
Right.
So
But your son now, right,
yes,
is already playing with, I'm saying he has a supercomputer, he has a smartphone.
no, we're not.
Okay.
He I would say smart TV. You know, he can get on YouTube and he watches like Mr. Beast and stuff like that. You know, there's some things there or whatever. Is how I would.
And
I
do
would
you
say,
want to?
I do. I would say give them very foundational. I want them to know the stories of Scripture. I want them to know all of the stories that are important to me. You know, these stories are important to me. And so in our church gatherings, we have a time that's dedicated to our kids hearing stories from. We started at the Old Testament, the Testament. We started at the Old Testament recently, and I want those to be in. I want the stories to be in, and then as far as like Christian faith is, the Apostles' Creed's pretty important to me as a you know unifying kind of very simple unifying thing, and then I think that to answer your question, then ultimately is age appropriate, is with time, but might they be exposed to these things before I'm ready? Possibly.
But think of just like the classic big ones, like are Adam and Eve the first people?
Yes, and
Right. So
that
like, and I know Jacob would be like, yes, they are. Now Jacob knows that there are other interpretations, but he'll be like,
yeah.
no, that's what now.
I would. So Peugeot actually gave me something really cool about that. I saw it was on like a short. It was really simple. But I would say something like, yeah, we can look at the science, and anthropologically, there's a big long history behind the world and humanity. But there is, in a sense, that the world did start 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. In a sense, because that's when we started to be able to write these stories down, and so the world that we actually understand is that old, because that's
Sure, but so you're like, you don't have to convince me. I'm
no,
with you.
yeah. I'm saying I would say, at some point that would to help do that. But right now it's just yes. Right now the story is simple because they're children. It's and the story does get more, as we're 40ish, approaching 40ish, like the story is more complex. And but I think that that's also the example is like we must contend and become more meta in a sense so that we can, instead of just like full sail. And I think even my conversation with Brendan yesterday and how it was received by certain folks is like, if you don't have this conversation and you don't have relationship and you just reject, that's going to ultimately be more damaging in the future for my kids and their faith, I think. So
right, but it takes, again, it's two to tango, which is my claim is the gap is getting smaller and smaller
yeah.
between the generations. So
Yes.
you're engaging in TLC. The question is, like, when your 14-year-old son challenges you with a question that you have zero capability to answer, right? So there's multiple levels. Like, my dad doesn't know anything anymore. Does my dad even know about like religion? Like, so many things could suddenly be shocked right then. Like, one second. This guy, and I'm living my life based on that. He's not even sure about the question I'm asking him. Does he even know what time it is? Like, who says I need to listen to curfew? Like, this guy doesn't even know what Jesus is. Like, so this to me is when a parent would suddenly want to toggle and be like, well, okay, yeah, like I can answer that for you. Like, that's not a problem. He's like, there's some that say X, Y, Z, and you let a kid play with that. Now, it would be reckless for you to read something you saw online, drop that bomb on him, and be like, but that's the only context I could give you. Like,
Right.
You have to be able to, like, your answer might lead to 3 more questions. And you have to like sort of anticipate those. So obviously it's not like when you're walking in the field on some random Sunday, you're like, you posit to your kids, does God exist? Like that would make sense. But it's even in the stories you're telling or you're teaching. Let's say my kids are watching Hercules, right? I'm like, guys, you see how like the ancient people, they're always trying to look for these concepts that are reminding them of Hashem, right? So like, and now you could crack at the jokes, you can understand things, but like the context is like, this is the world trying to talk to God, and they do it through these stories. Now, so that I drop that basically.
I guess the way that, another kind of example would be like, there's a lot of Christians up in arms about Taylor Swift's new album, like in the kind of Southern evangelical.
I don't know about this drama, but okay.
So I'm just to your point of like your kids watching Hercules and it pointing at something. So from how my wife and I would like take, because there's a part that says, "I would have died for your sins," talking about an ex-lover, and so
who says this?
Taylor Swift.
Okay,
and that's very out of context to the whole song. But the kind of Christian conservative impulse is to say, "Oh my gosh, she thinks she's Jesus. Oh my gosh."
Just like Madonna and Just Like a Prayer.
That was a big deal. To a degree. I would just say like, well, what is she saying here? She's saying like that she would have sacrificed her desires for this person, even if they wronged her, but they didn't return love. And then that kind of is, I mean, that's easy to make that leap, but instead of the impulse being culturally, that's coming from the conservative side but yeah, I mean, those are kind of.
But she's filling that void, right? This is just like another person that we could all like look up to. Right. Give me your tickets. Give me your songs. Sing to me.
I mean, very much. But to even just say, look, she actually is contending with the same story that we're all contending with, which is this, these ideas of sacrifice, these ideas of pain, these ideas of betrayal, and
yeah, but I don't know the name of this group, but like it's the priest's prayer. May God shine His face upon you.
Oh, like the benediction, like the
right. Okay, so there's a beautiful song on YouTube of like all these Christians doing it, like, and everyone's like super into it, like right. So that is Taylor's not doing that.
No, she's not.
Right. So like that, I'm saying like, sure, she's singing, right? But David's saying before the Lord. And like I was saying, so I would be more forgiving if she's like trying to sing about gospels. But like, but that's not what she's doing. So I'm saying she's like, so that goes back to like the protesters, right? Like this is all holy energy that is being used the wrong way. Right. Is there something beautiful about people getting together in music? Like, yeah, great. I'm glad they're not all snorting cocaine. Like, good. There's worse things they could be doing. But it's part of us, like, it's part of us all wanting to be enchanted. It's part of us all wanting to be something so powerful about all of us, the beat syncing all of us, right? We know scientifically that you could sync everyone's heartbeat to the music that they're listening to, right? So that's like super, super deep, and we feel that, and we want to feel that. We want to feel connected, and all those are just elements to, singing out to God's name in one accord. But we're looking for it in all these different sort of elements, and all these elements are just like hints of like, this is how I connected through Batman, through Michael Moore, through The Last Avatar, through we need Marvel movies. We need Marvel movies about like we need like The Matrix, and that's the saddest thing. It's been 20 years. What are we going to do? Let's do another Matrix. Let's do Lion King. Let's do it again. Like, so they realize they stretch these stories as far as they can. And not like I don't have a new story. I could go biblical, but like, which I never understand, because the Bible has like the best story. So just Hollywood that up. I don't know if your sons watched like The Prince of Egypt.
Yeah, we've watched that. Yeah.
That movie, like anytime I see the burning bush, I'm crying. I can't handle it. It's too much for me. I recommend anyone who will hear this to, after this, go watch. Okay, this is something crazy. I can't believe I did it, but it was so interesting. So online, there's a phenomenon which is like reaction videos, right? Like, so because the internet's amazing, I clicked, is there reaction to the burning bush, right? So there's all these reactions to people watching the burning bush, and it's sad because to see all these people that are not even familiar with the story all get emotional at that scene. And the reason they get emotional at that scene because they sound like, wow, isn't that nuts that story happened? And I'm like, yes, it is nuts that story happened. And they're crying, seeing it in a cartoon, right? Like of that, but it's such a profound scene. The fact that they also used like a woman's voice, a man's voice, a baby's voice, like in God's voice, all in one. The fact that they use Val Kilmer's voice both for Moses and for God. These are like, they're taking this from midrashes, like that God spoke to Moses in the voice of his father, right? So he would recognize him. So there would be like a point of connection over there. And that's very much like onboarding, right? Like I'm going to speak to you first in your language because I want to be able to relate to you. If I'm going to start with like these veils off the bat, it's going to be very difficult. So I definitely recommend people watching that scene again. And I think like people, I mean, we tap into it by doing like Star Wars and really like we're winking back at the story, but like we should just feel confident to be like, and I think the Prince of Egypt was that story was so awesome and they did it well where people are like, no, this movie is flipping amazing. So we just don't want to do that anymore, but there's so many good stories and we could teach so many lessons over there. But, and maybe there'll be like a revival of that too at some point that people want to go back into those stories.
I think they will because, Marvel is almost 20 years old. We're coming up like on 20 years, like you're saying, they get stretched so thin and it's, it loses its power because there's a source to all of it, like you're saying. And as we're kind of like winding down a little bit here, I was curious, like, with your because you said there is the Jewish contingent of the TLC kind of community is obviously smaller than that I'm aware of proportionally, I guess. Right. Unpack again, and if you will, and I want to reference people back to our first conversation where you talk more extensively about the Noahide Jewish movement, but your desire to continue in this relationship, in this dance, and kind of break it down a little bit more, I guess, distinctly for people related to this dance that we're in.
I didn't wake up one morning and be like, this is my mission right now. Right. Yeah. When I sort of found myself in the space. Yeah. Right. Then I am a believer that all things are destined in a certain point for, like God wanted me to buy that new shirt. No, I'm just saying, but honey, you have to understand. I was presented with an opportunity and sort of, I felt like a responsibility to be like, I need to be working on healing the relationship between Judaism and the other world faith religions, because how do we move forward? Right? The tribes need to come back, and there's good, when the tribes come back, and tribes have come back, there's tensions over there. Like, sorry, Ethiopian Jews that potentially go all the way back to the first temple in your traditions. We've continued on since then. So it doesn't even matter that you may be historically more correct. The train has left that station. So there's those tensions again internally. So how at some point I need to speak to the other people of the world who've been made in God's image. So I just felt like the opportunity was too great to pass on. And I was in a space which is, yes, Christian, but I would say more seeking, right? It's seekers and God-fearers. What again, I know it's predominantly Christian, but I would argue that the Christians themselves are struggling, right? So I want to be there to offer assistance with that struggle. And in no way, again, we're not proselytizing. I'm not saying, I believe that I just need to represent what Judaism is. And in the sense which is, it's not here to fight. It's not here to take over. It's here to guide. And we haven't been doing that for 2,000 years. We've just been reacting. So if my nation isn't guiding, I feel like I need to represent as best as I can what I believe the Torah values are and what Hashem wants from us to represent. And in that, I know that in that representation, there's room for diversity. So that's again a feature, not a bug. And then a conversation has to happen. And so I'm in this space because I feel like this is where I need to be. And it seems to be, I can't tell you if it's positive. Like, what's the like? I would say this kind of conversation for me is a win, not because like maybe he's going to become Jewish, because that I'm not. Don't do that, right? Like, you don't need to do that. But it's more about if he understood me, then I believe that he and I conversed about God, and that's a God that he and I potentially could see, and then we're together. And that's a win. And like, that's that in a world where there's so much hate and so much division, like, how is that not like a huge win? And I do believe, I mean, it goes all the way down to one, but generally speaking, we talk about like two people that are discussing, the Shekhinah resides with them. So that's not true if you and I are discussing like porn, right? The Shekhinah is not there. But in this kind of conversation, I want to say that the Shekhinah is there. And an opportunity to bring the Shekhinah down or participate with it, how could we miss such a thing? So I would say more than that, if a community like this is oriented properly, then I want to believe that the Shekhinah is there as well. And if God's divine presence is there, that's a space I want to be. I don't know where it leads to, and the nourishment and spiritual fulfillment I get is not because I am lacking. I don't think, it's not like I'm seeking necessarily. What I was seeking is to see more of him. And this space shows me more of him in an ironic way, right? Because like, it would be like obvious, like the temple falls from the sky. That'd be like, okay, I get it. Like, I'm seeing it. But like, while I'm in this land and while I'm moving forward and like, I see the meaning crisis and I see what Israel's dealing with, I'm like, and I want to see, God, show me more of you, expose more of you. We're tired. Like, just save us. Like, come to us, or we say, return to me and I'll return to you. So I want to say, like, what are the acts I could do? Be a good dad, be a good, pay my taxes. What more can I do? That's like more out of the box where I could show God that I'm reaching. So I feel like in this space, which is quote unquote more foreign, it's a declaration of I'm reaching. I want to see more of you. And in these kind of conversations, and even in Brendan sort of like being like sort of like relaxed and being like, wow, this is actually sort of nice. That to me is exposing to him. He saw you for you. And I believe that means he saw God's image. And then, yes, then more of that. So if I could partake in that in that exploration and that exposure, I believe I want to be there. It's nourishing for me to see. It's inspiring for me to see. And I don't know, it teaches me humility. It teaches me how to be careful with the way I speak and how I speak. So I guess those are the reasons. I hope they suffice.
Yeah, those are good ones. And I feel like I'm hopefully join you in that. And those are beautiful things. And I mean, I speak for myself, but in my more recent coming into an engagement in the space, but that I think that the diversity, having multiple people, even if there's smaller contingents, even, how like Sam still wants to hang out as a unitary, like, and that this,
I love it.
Yes, even the relational aspect of that seeks the understanding versus the right, who's right in this current, or always trying to seek who's right, is, I think, whenever that's the metamorphosis that I hope for. And I think that whenever, I think Hanselman yesterday was like, what metamorphosis are you trying to, and I was like, no. He thought I was like, he wants that I was trying to make it into Brendan's meta religion or something. But anyways, man,
I'm excited for at 120, as we say, like when the age you die, so to speak, when we're all in heaven, right? Eventually when Anselman comes, we'll be like, Anselman, you're like, you guys are here. We're like, what's up, dude? He's gonna look at God, and God's gonna have a face of like, I don't know, these guys, get in here, dude.
Yeah, man.
But,
That's a beautiful vision. But dude, thanks for coming on again. I think I'm gonna shut it down for today. And it's been an honor. It's been a blessing. It's been good.
Likewise.
Yeah, man. So we'll
catch you around the corner.
Yes, sir. All right, man.
When is this? When are you dropping it?
The win? Oh man. This one might skip ahead because it's so connected to the Brendan conversation. So maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. There you go.
Okay. Wow. 1 second. Maybe I should cancel my meetings. Okay.
I'll give you a heads up.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, add one thing.
We talked about the relational in this corner. So I mentioned this sage, the Meiri, that was very more sympathetic to the Christian and talked about how he identifies him as a Noahide. One of the terms he uses is it's called shalom, lichfo lo shalom, which means to multiply and a hello, which means like more than just saying hi, but like an intense hello. And he says that is the kind of relationship we want to be creating with our Christian brothers. He calls it like a double hello, but means like an intense relationship, one where you love him. And he goes as far as saying like that in that case, it's our responsibility to take care of his livelihood, potentially even, desecrate the Sabbath to save him, right? Which is like the relationship is like much closer. So I would say that here in the relational, you get to see that there's a sense where like, I want to quote unquote double hello, right? I want to multiply my relationship with you. I want to be more than just surface level. I want it to be deeper than that. And I think we're just, in my sense, I'm just tapping into what our sages were talking too long ago. And I hope, as you said, that this relationship continues to flourish.
Well, I think it will. I believe it will. I want it to as well, brother. So with that, man, thanks for coming on again.
You got it.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in and staying with us till the end of today's episode. Your support and digital connection is deeply meaningful to me. If you've enjoyed our conversation and you believe that these conversations bring real value to your life and in this space, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, helping me reach the goal of starting memberships where we can continue building a TLC, this little corner of the internet sub-community. My hope is to be able to further cultivate digital community on this channel, to be a space where kindred souls can engage in deeper, more intimate discussions and allow space for more private, monthly, yours truly small group conversations. In the future, I hope that this endeavor to take it further, taking yours truly conversation craft out on the road to have meaningful, embodied dialogue with individuals from various corners of the corner. Together, let's continue to build spaces that further foster connection, growth, and understanding around deeply meaningful realities. Thank you again for being a part of this journey. We'll see you around. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.